Welcome to the third joint FASI. My name's Chris Coville. I'm the moderator on this occasion in association, as well as being a visiting professor at FASI, King's College London. Just a reminder, everyone, that the webinar is unclassified and on the record. Please use the Q&A facility, and Georgie Lucas will manage and filter out. We have actually had over 200 registered, so a few more people we can expect to be joining. That must be a record, so that's great. This session, we're asking a simple question. Is the UK adequately protected against attack from the air or space? If not, what needs to be done? What are the options for doing so, realistically? And what are the alliance mechanisms which might provide some sort of the cover that's necessary? Questions are not new. Trenchard had a long struggle against the complacency of the 1930s before he could deliver a modernized and fully integrated system, one, of course, that enabled the success of the Battle of Britain. Duncan Sandys famously wrote off manned systems in the 1957 Defence White Paper, and in doing so damaged the UK's aerospace industries as well as its air defence posture. It actually took over a decade to recover. Indeed, the recovery was never really achieved completely. And of course, a succession of defence reviews have eroded our ability to control airspace, both in the UK air defence region and for deployed forces. It's trite concepts, or you may wish to call them fudges in plain speak, such as layered defence, coordinating with our allies, have concealed the fact that the UK has had to depend upon a wacky notion of missile-equipped Type 45s around the UK, not helped by a significantly diminished fighter fleet, short-range air defence virtually non-existent, and airborne early warning platform numbers cut to a level where maintaining a presence is frankly doubtful. As you know, only 3 Wedgetails currently funded. But is this all scaremongering? What is the threat? Protected as we are by the layered defences in mainland Europe and the likely American systems should we deploy as a coalition? Well, these, of course, have been the defensive arguments put forward to counter those who've been getting increasingly alarmed at our accelerating shortfalls. Now, before getting the views of my distinguished colleagues, Dr. Sophie Antrobus and Air Marshal Phil Osborne, I hope that between us, you, the informed weaponistas, and we on the panel can agree 4 points from the start. First, what is improbable is not impossible, and recent history has demonstrated the folly of dismissing unlikely scenarios. Ergo, that the UK would not be attacked from air or space is at best naive, worst downright dangerous. Second, lose the war in the air or space, and you lose the war. They're not my words, they're Montgomery's, and by extension, demonstrating that you have the capabilities to achieve air superiority swiftly over the battle space is surely an essential component of deterrence. Third, the threat is complex, multifaceted, and sometimes difficult to attribute, especially so for operations in the grey zone. Fourth, funding will be a challenge, so we will need to prioritize on solid evidence, not speculation, and that means more science than arm-waving strategy, the sort that we've seen in the past. Now, I would add to these points the need to have political and military leadership, together with the agile acquisition processes capable of moving forward swiftly, especially in delivering early improvements. And so on to the Strategic Defence Review. And Osby, there's a recognition in the Robinson report of the growing importance of IAMD. Indeed, I recall that it promises £1 billion towards improving our capabilities. But there will be competing needs, and in this area more than others, progress could be slowed down by the Whitehall system hiding behind the need to harmonise with NATO's European programmes. The SDR registers concern even alarm. But we all know the Treasury's ability to put the brakes on even the most urgent defence requirements. So, Osby, over to you.
Chris, thank you very much. For those who don't know me, I'm not Chris's elderly son. I did about 40 years in the RAF, retired about 5 years ago. I was doing operational command, capability management and intelligence stuff, and I now work to pay my mortgage. Clearly not from this webinar. Chris, to be fair, I think your gentle contextual description there of decline is recognised by the SDR and its remediation highlighted as a strategic priority. I've got a couple of quotes. The UK, with its allies, especially those in NATO, must once again, that's my emphasis, be ready to deal with the most demanding of circumstances, deterring and preventing a full-scale war by being ready to fight and win. And Chris, I think your first question is the UK adequately protected from against attack from the air is answered by the SDR as a clear no. Again, to quote, defence must once again have credible plans for defending UK home territory as part of NATO, rooted in improved national resilience. I'm sure we'll get into that in questions. And we will protect the UK homeland with up to £1 billion new funding invested in homeland, air and missile defence. And that sentence also has, I'm creating a cyber EM command to defend Britain from daily attacks in the grey zone. So perhaps not the full 1 billion for IAMD in the first instance. Now, I think it might be worth highlighting a little some of the areas that I know, I think most of us know, led to SDR thinking. And the first thing is the threat. I don't think we need to rehearse the real and enduring danger of Russia. What is probably worth highlighting is for the first time probably in my time in around the mod, there is a real sense of peril in Whitehall. Whitehall always does cognitive dissonance, but there is a real sense of peril that this is something that has to be grappled with. It doesn't make it any easier, but I think it makes it an imperative that various politicians and various government departments know they need to face up to. Um, I think coupled with that, and this is a trend that I noted quite firmly in my time from leaving as Chief of Defence Intelligence and then coming back and helping with the SDR. There's something about the increasing likelihood of Chinese capability, which is being designed at pace for the huge ranges in the Pacific. That capability will impact the Euro-Atlantic theatre. I think we have to assume that is going to happen, and that will either happen by normal proliferation, defense sales, or by design. Something there to destabilize on one side of the world while there is a conflict or confrontation on the other. And linked to that, of course, is that third element of threat context is probably evidence of the quickening US pivot to the Pacific. So there's something there about threat dominating SDR thinking. The second was vulnerability, and actually, some people know this, it's open source. The mod war gamed the mass missile attack that Russia carried out on the first night of its most recent war against Ukraine onto the UK. And that within the mod and within government was quite a sobering exercise. Now, it should not have told people anything they didn't already know, but I think that introduction of reality to normal operational analysis was something which resonated quite firmly with a number of senior decision makers. So there's something about threat, something about vulnerability. And there's probably then something which characterized the SDR very early was accepting that NATO commitments are indeed actually commitments, and recognizing that our NATO responsibilities demand that we defend the UK. Article 3 is a fundamental underpinning for Article 5, and also a recognition, I think, not welcomed by some, that nobody else was going to take the lead on UK defence. That was our job, and that should be our job. I think there were other things, but those things contributed to the context which drove the SDR to be clear, I think to some degree, on the capability imperative around IAMD. And the SDR also highlighted some key elements of any future IAMD systems. For example, it tells us that effective and capable IAMD for the UK can only be accomplished as part of a NATO endeavour. I think the trick here is to make sure it doesn't slow things up, but actually we are at the right pace with allies. That may be more useful with some allies than others, and I think our relationship with the GEF nations is a positive in this context. The other thing the SDR tells us is that timely, resilient, and integrated C2 is critical success. Most of you will know that is a real issue across the whole of the defence review for defence, but we know that's particularly important in the aerospace domain in the context that we're talking about. Another thing the SDR pulls up, which I think is worth highlighting, is that combat air provides the core of UK IAMD effect capability. And the SDR is pretty clear. Air defense against air and cruise missile attack is important, but as important is the offensive counter-air and deep precision strike capability, nullifying threats before they are launched. This is a key tenet of the investments in GCAP and FCAS. So there's some things that the SDR pulls out that helps us, I think, understand the shape of that required IMD system. Indeed, the SDR helps us with some things around the solution. It highlights that we need to improve the foundations, quoting again, the foundations of the UK's integrated air and missile defence capabilities to bolster home defence, which I think is the author's code for much better, pervasive, and resilient air and space domain command and control and situational awareness. Our knowledge of what's going on around our airspace, up to and including space, is, I think, acknowledged as poor. Um, there's something in the SDR saying very clearly we need more combat air, crewed and uncrewed, and more airborne early warning aircraft on top of the below minimum levels that we have now. And I think one of the key parts in the space section is a recognition of the key importance of that domain, in that the SDR instructs the MOD to seek partners to develop a next generation overhead persistent ISR capability, providing the ability to sense, warn, and track threats in the Euro-Atlantic. Scale, I know Sophie will come back to this. When we talk about the Euro-Atlantic, it's very easy for us, and I think the SDR made this assumption early on and then changed its emphasis. It's very easy for us to look to the east. The ranges that we're talking about means the west and certainly the north is as dangerous to the nation, much more so than when we've had to do this previously. So the SDR gives us, I think, a few hints. What it doesn't do, not in a substantive way, is talk about timing, and it doesn't talk about the scale of the challenge. And the scale of the challenge, we all know, is pretty large. In fact, being involved in the SDR, there were a couple of things which the broader team, could not cost. Didn't have the time, didn't have the data. One was national resilience, and the other one was integrated air and missile defense. How big do you make this scope? What do you decide to protect are not questions for defence. The whole of government will come back, I'm sure, to that. So as the SDR doesn't help us with timing or the scale of the challenge, that what next and at what pace is critical to reducing risk and improving deterrence, and of course drives everything in terms of capability. The long promised defence investment plan will, of course, only be the start. So we might usefully perhaps touch very briefly on what the mod is likely thinking now. The first thing is I think it's really grappling with that scale. That massive challenge of IMD, of what needs to be done, and the resources available to do it clearly don't match. And hence, as you can't defend all things all the time, you've got to defend the right things at the right time. This is why the defense, you have to know what the right things are. And that defense has to be configured against a threat, which is a very, very broad continuum from swarming drones to ballistic and hypersonic missiles. One size will not fit all. Grappling with scale, I think, is probably linked to trying to mobilize a broad approach. There's a key part of a defensive alliance thinking. The UK must be able to safeguard the means of response, a key part of deterrence, as is sustained resilience. That comes from a broad approach. It's a multi-domain problem, which has multi-domain, multinational, and whole of government solutions. These things are difficult to line up. Lining up departmental and national priorities rather than just standing around observing the problem is a real challenge. And then within that broad approach, I think there's a recognition that it's not all about defense, it's about offensive well. We've mentioned that from a combat air point of view. So that probably brings you to, okay, so what do you do? What are those priorities? And I think the MOD is pretty clear that the first instance, command and control, allied to improved situational awareness, is almost certainly the first steps. Um, this is something which is inextricably linked to fulfilling the broader SDR priorities of accelerated digital capabilities, integration, and seamless connectivity. One cannot drag behind the other. And then that range of threat I talked about will require a range of effectors. And trying to work out which of those effectors are most useful in what phasing, I think the MOD will be thinking about. Clattering cheap drones, frankly, has got to be different to how you cope with cruise missiles, which has got to be different to how you cope with hypersonics. And in all of that is how much can you rely on really deep responsive strike. So difficult contextual problem and frankly a very difficult prioritization problem. You'll be welcome to know these are my last few comments. Um, Thinking about the SDR and its aftermath, we should recognize that the recognition within the SDR that there is a problem, the government signing up to that recognition is welcome. Yes, it's late, but it's welcome. A recognition of strategic weakness is always the first step to fixing it. This is a good thing. However, we should all recognize that the adequate solution, because we won't get an excellent solution, an adequate solution is neither easy or in any way cheap. This is not going to happen overnight. And therefore, probably the last thing I would say in this section is the innovation, and it's a shame that this off-used word has become a bit of an empty trope. But the innovation that characterized thinking around an integrated air defense system in the 1930s that Chris mentioned in his intro needs to be just as prevalent in 2025 and beyond. The adequate solution has got to include innovation at the system level as well as at the subsystem and effector level. Chris, thank you.
Great, thanks very much. And a few of the questions that have come up, I think you probably addressed. Jeffrey Wardle, his question: a future Battle of Britain, how much preparation are we making for base dispersal and support infrastructure, including digital data support? What ground-based mobile air defense systems are available? Well, for that last bit first, Jeff, you probably know that there is a program called the Future Air Dominance System, which is actually looking at massive improvements, very significant GBAD. Many of those have been announced, and I think actually the medium is a medium range. There is an initial operational clearance sometime next year or the year after. So things are moving, but albeit slowly in that. As far as dispersal, we all know the issue there. We have main operating bases that we've condensed all of our forces. The obvious one, of course, is Bryce, perhaps more than anything else, but Waddington as well, and to an extent places like Marham. But I don't think we can go into too much detail on that because we're straying into classified material, unless Osby feels he can say something on that. And of course, the
Um,
whole business of digital data support. I think that's absolutely vital. You make a very good point. In terms of the overall category of that, I see that as being part of CNI, which is actually critical national infrastructure, which is part of the point that Osby made. Um, did you want to say anything on
uh,
those, Osby, at that stage?
I think it's I think it's worth just pulling up the the Air Force is currently working a concept, which has been working for some time, actually predates the SDR, around agile combat employment. It recognizes what you described, Chris, in terms of centralization of resources. And I know we can discuss what's in the service's mind is how do you configure to use as many operating areas, it could be airfields, there could be highway strips, as much as you can to keep yourself mobile and therefore to make yourself more of a targeting problem. I think we also know that when the Air Force looks at it, it's not thinking about it in just infrastructure. It's thinking about it infrastructure, it's thinking about logistics, it's also thinking about the digital wrapper that modern systems have to work within and are most effective if they work within it. So to answer Jeff's question, I think there is quite a lot of conceptual and then bringing those concepts to life answers to that agile, that dispersal demand signal.
Okay, thanks. And Ian Easton, you've made a couple of points there. One, I think, has been picked up already by Osby, and that's integration interoperability, a key tenets of a successful IAMD approach. Panel's view on the UK's ability to integrate with NATO, and perhaps you can cover that in your bit later, Sophie. And what are we doing to improve integration, defence digital background targeting web? I think Osby made the point that this is absolutely the number one priority in the MOD. That they picked this up very quickly as being absolutely vital. Ian, you make also a point on the offensive capabilities picked up and mentioned by Osby, a part of the deterrence effect, and the future combat aircraft system is that ultimate backstop. Do we need additional strike measures? Well, we took strike attack. We know the F-35As will be coming in. I hope that they will have more than just a nuclear capability. I think actually with the F-35Bs, we've got an opportunity for a fairly potent strike and attack capability. But yeah, other than I do as a mud mover, do you want to make a comment on Ian's point there?
Um, yes, I think from certainly one of the things that was identified really early on by some of the senior judgment panels in the SDR is that having no options between Storm Shadow and something thermonuclear just wasn't going to work if you were serious about deterring and serious about having the ability to escalate. And therefore, there was a lot of thinking. How much of that is able to be reflected within numerous defence investment plans, we'll see. But there is a clear recognition that you've got to have a range of deterrence options, and those deterrent options have got to have real reach. And that's reach that frankly in the past few generations we this is not reach in terms of hundreds of miles. This is bigger than that. I mentioned the issue with range. I know Sophie will come back to it. So there is thinking going on around that. Chris, I can also pick up the Brandon's question if you wish
Yes,
around
please. Yeah, thank you.
one of the one of the shifts that I think a welcome shift that the mod is allowed to be much more focused on is being more threat led. And therefore, frankly, the political debate around at what level does a certain country become classified in between politicians as a threat? It kind of doesn't matter. Um, China is developing systems that have significantly enhanced ranges. They have to because that's the nature of the Pacific theatre. Chinese systems, therefore, will be proliferated and they could be chosen to be proliferated. The mod recognizes that and will plan against it because to do anything else would be self-delusional. So I'm less worried about Brandon's point. I think the mod has grasped this along with a lot of all the leading NATO nations and they'll seek to react accordingly.
Okay, thanks. Well, I think we've got another couple of questions there. Are we making the challenge of protecting industry? And it's a good point, actually. And this is actually, although it's not specifically made so far in the Robinson report, Osby, but we do know that actually there has to be a closer relationship, and that's part of the defence review, a far better relationship between industry, government, and our capabilities, operational capabilities. And I suspect from that there will be the need to protect our industrial base as well. Would you agree with that?
I absolutely would. But I think how we do that is probably the most difficult and therefore the most demanding question when we talk about resilience. I think there's a risk that when we talk about national resilience, we talk about protecting key parts of national infrastructure, power stations, etc. Um, Building and then sustaining supply chains which have resilience and multi-path elements to them will incur cost So there's something there around the more resilient you want to be to physical attack as well as virtual attack um, is not going to be cheap or easy. So there's going to be a very challenging balance between the two. Um, if we're serious about this, we think much more about dual use facilities. If we're serious about this, we think much more about procuring industrial capacity and depth around that industrial capacity than just procuring capabilities which may or may not become passé in a year or 2 years or so. And if we're good at this, and I mean we collectively, that resilient industrial capacity capable of production and sustainment under physical attack, weeks or months of physical attack, will be, I believe, an underpinning non-discretionary element of realistic deterrence.
Absolutely. Got it. Chris Hahn, you make a good point because in the past, particularly those of us with wings on our chest, have actually been too focused on kinetic. But I hope Osby's comments have reassured you that actually the whole integration, going back to the 30s idea, the integration, the total integration of command and control systems is key, and that hopefully there will be enough people in the MOD who get that, and the focus will not be just on kinetic abilities. I'm sure you'd agree with that, Osby, as from some of the comments you've made. And just I think probably that's probably enough on the Q&A for the time being. We'll pick up some of these later, but I'd like to move on to Sophie because we've made lots of reference to the importance of integration with allies. And actually, Osby, you mentioned the Jeff and the recent conference that they've had, very successful, and certainly listening to the Defence Secretary, they were actually making big progress, the integration with the Jeff. Sophie, over to you actually to pick up on the alliance concepts here.
Thank you very much, Chris, and thanks everybody for joining this webinar. It's great there's so many of you there, and thank you for all the questions so far. Please keep them coming. And just to touch on a couple of points that on the Q&A, so I don't forget them. To Ian's point about additional strike measures, a point I made actually to the House of Lords International Relations and Defence Committee last week, which I'll reiterate here, is the decoupling in terms of the UK's procurement of F-35 between the F-35 and weapons, I think is a bit of an issue here. We are not looking, it's going to be the early 2030s now before we expect integration of the Spear 3 standoff weapon capability on F-35. So that is, I would suggest, I mean, there's not a lot we can do about it except keep working with the Americans and partner nations so that we don't get to the back of the queue in terms of that weapons integration. But I think that's maybe a lesson to be learned. And then just on the dispersal thing, I'd say Osby mentioned about dispersing to airfields and highways. We have to acknowledge that unlike our Scandinavian or Nordic partners, we have not built any highways in order to be landed on by combat aircraft. I think we think maybe we could just land on the M1 and it'll all be fine. But actually, Sweden builds its highways or chooses which highways to build that are capable of doing that. So I think we're looking more at using maybe former airfields, civilian airfields, that kind of thing for dispersal. Anyway, to go to sort of what my sort of opening comments as well. And by the way, introductions as well. Sophie Antrobus, I am a co-director of the Freeman Aerospace Institute, so very happy to be co-hosting this webinar today. I'm a senior research fellow at the Institute. I have a PhD in air power. I've been with the Institute 5 years, and way before that, I was in the Air Force for 20 years, but that's a long time ago now. So a few points I'd like to make. The first sort of regarding NATO. I just want to talk, I actually did geography as my first degree, so I always like going back to that. But in order to talk about that, I think in the UK for a long time thought of ourselves as the sort of far distant end of the threat. If we're talking particularly about Russia, the Central European threat, we kind of see ourselves on a curve from the UK down to sort of Spain and Portugal. Now, I do acknowledge that we understand that we've got the North Atlantic, the North Sea, those kind of areas that are closer to us. But I do think geography and distance has made us a little complacent. And if you look at levels of spending on IAMD, I think that's borne out across NATO. You look at the intensity of focus that, for example, Poland has on spending hard cash on defences compared to nations like ours and others further distant from the potential adversary. It speaks for itself. But, I was at a NATO Ukraine conference recently in Sweden with academics and military from Ukraine. And they said that the biggest lesson that we should learn, not just the UK, but in general, is that, and I'll quote, critical assets can be targeted from the air regardless of range. You must be able to fight in several directions, multiple borders, multiple directions. Time to strike is more important than distance. They just wanted to emphasize that geography is not really relevant anymore. And we've seen that. I don't even need to tell you, obviously, in terms of Fox Spider's Web, which was Ukraine's attack on the Russian strategic bomber force, a very ingenious attack using trucks, and Kalawi, which was Israel's attack on Iran using Israelis based inside Iran to launch that attack, demonstrate that we can't rely on being further away from potential adversaries than other neighbouring NATO nations. I mean, there's no reason why we can't have cargo ships off the North Sea, just outside territorial waters with drones on board, and that's not very far from Lakenheath and Marham. I think this distance thing also comes back to, and this is an element, obviously, of air and missile defense, is resilience. We don't have a national defense plan. We don't really have a national conversation about this threat, and that it isn't as far away as we might think it is. We don't have the same resilience as maybe some of our neighbours. And again, at this conference that I was at, there was a Portuguese delegate who was talking about when Lisbon had its power failures, electricity failures earlier this year, and just how Lisbon ground to a halt. Total chaos. People couldn't, were panicked. Well, wanted to panic buy, but then couldn't buy because they didn't have any cash, because nobody has any cash anymore. The traffic lights didn't work, so the traffic stopped, so there were no ambulances. And he was reflecting on that. And at the same time, a Swedish colleague got an email, and he just sort of put his hand up and read it out because it was sort of relevant to the conversation. That he got an email just letting him know that his children's school was having one of its preparation for war days. And so just to let him know that the children would be being taken down to the cellars for teaching, they'd be working underground, they'd be having cold food that day. They'd be just going through the motions of what would happen if they came under attack. And the difference between those two nations, two conversations, and two bits of geography, right, was quite striking. Enough on that. Secondly, IAMD, Integrated Air and Missile Defense, is a bit of a handful to talk about, and it involves all sorts of different concepts, from surface attack to camouflage to resilience and redundancy, as we've been talking about. I don't think we've figured out, we, academics like me, commentators, the military defense communications, how to actually explain this and how to talk about it in ways that make it understandable for the public. And I do get the sense, I mean, this talk about Iron Dome, and I have written about this, I think that's unhelpful. I was talking to somebody about this who's a well-informed observer, who was saying, well, I'm really pleased there's more interest in air and missile defense and in commitment in the strategic defense review, because it will, might mean my mum and dad survive attack. They live in, I think it was Birmingham. I kind of had to say, right, at the moment, we don't even have the capability to protect critical national infrastructure, in my humble opinion, properly. And Osby's referred to the need to even see what we're facing, sense it, and so on. we're not going to be protecting that guy's mum and dad. Now, but how honest we want to be about that is up for debate. Maybe we want to debate it here, but as I think, as we said, we can't defend all things all the time, and we need to have more of, I think, an honest debate publicly about that in order to get people, I guess, more interested or more committed to the whole concept. And finally, and I think others have touched on this already, in terms of, I think, yeah, Chris has alluded to this. We have a history in the UK of admiring the problem. Somebody said at a conference on this a little while ago, it was last year, that the UK, or defence slash government, we are in an endless state of aspiration. And I think that's quite a good point. The 2023 Defence Command Paper refresh said we will step up our efforts to deliver integrated air and missile defence. That's about all it said. As Osby's very eloquently spelt out, the 2025 SDR did include an awful lot more on it and clearly recognised it as much more important. But as actually, I think you also mentioned, that 1 billion does include, as you said, creating a new cyber EM command. And so there is a little bit of lack of clarity over how much of that 1 billion is for air and missile defence. And I think that's a question to be asked. So I think we're moving forward, but I still have my reservations, given our ability to sort of think of ourselves as an island nation on the edge of things, given the difficulties there are of communicating this quite complex concept. Although, I mean, in other ways, it's quite simple. And also, given our ability, I mean, as both Chris and Osby have outlined, this is a really difficult, complicated, expensive thing to tackle. And therefore, I think that's why we keep not tackling it. I'm pleased that we're in the best place we have been for decades in doing so. But I think that the jury, for me, is still out on how much we're going to be able to achieve. I'll leave it there for questions.
Okay, Sophie, thanks very much. There are several very good points, some of them turned into questions about the importance of establishing robust command and control, keeping the data safe, and so on and so forth. Some of this, of course, strays into classified material, but I think there is a genuine recognition, and I hope it's not just admiring the problems, Sophie, a genuine recognition of the importance of data protection. There are several organizations now which have been set up to do just that. We'll have to wait and see to what extent they're successful. What we do know is the hackers can be very, very good and very clever at getting inside systems. And the Lisbon experience that Sophie mentioned, and my son and his family live in Lisbon, and it was indeed absolutely chaotic. I think the greatest impact was the very nearly increased suicide rate of teenagers who found that they couldn't use their handhelds and couldn't communicate with each other, perhaps. And that sort of spins into your comment on the importance of communication and resilience of society. And this is actually, Osby brought out in the SDR so far, the importance of actually making sure our people understand the issues. And that is important really at so many levels. But I think when we start moving towards 5% of GDP by 2035, or even 3% by the end of this decade, there are going to be people asking questions and challenging the amount of money that's being spent on defence. And I think we need to do a far better job collectively in making sure the public is better informed. And there's no more important thing, and it's a point that's brought out by one of the questions, the importance of deterrence. And I think the question, and I can't say exactly where it is. I think, yes, it's actually Mohammed. In the age of escalation, how can deterrent stability be maintained without triggering an arms race in IAMD? And of course, perhaps a classic example of this is the risk of ballistic missile defense leading to a significant increase in arms race. I'll leave it to my colleagues who may wish to answer that particular one, but there is always a risk in if you fill all the rungs in, if you like, in the ladder of escalation and deterrence, that you will actually provoke an arms race. But I think the alternative is to leave yourself vulnerable in one area. That's why I personally lobbied the last chief of the air staff to the extent that he was almost refusing to answer the phone when I called him on the business of tactical nuclear weapons, which we were singularly lacking in as part of our ladder of escalation leading to a comprehensive deterrence. But perhaps, Osby, I'd like you to comment on. Do you think that we are better in terms of identifying the importance of resilience in critical national infrastructure, including our mobile systems, a point that was made by one person, and also preparing our public? And would you agree, and Sophie, you can answer this one as well, that the risk of missing rungs in the deterrence ladder is so important that we might just have to risk provoking another arms race? But Osby, you first.
Um, Thanks, Chris. Both of those things are clearly linked. And Mohammed, thank you for your questions. I think, if I may, I think they're kind of after the fact though. In terms of we're in an arms race, it's happened, it's happening. It's happening in a physical sense, it's happening in a virtual sense, it's happening in a conceptual sense. There are some countries in Europe, us to some extent, others much more acutely, who, when they stop and think about it, are already under attack. They're already in that escalation ladder. I would offer there are many things from a cultural perspective, but one of the things that I think more generally has to be accepted that is that if you want to fight and win, and in these type of things there isn't really an option to do anything else. You don't want to fight and lose. If you want to fight and win, you're going to have to escalate, and you have to escalate quicker and much more violently than the opposition. Because it's only when you prove you can do that that the opposition will stop and think about whether they want to start something. If you're a defensive alliance, arguably, you've got to be even more capable of escalation violently and quickly because you're starting, by definition, from a defensive mindset. So, so there's something about there is an arms race. We need to get on with it. Now, that does not mean you should not have controls, etc., 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 but you can only negotiate controls if you are negotiating from a position of strength. Your potential adversaries have to respect your capabilities to want to then restrict theirs. So there's something in there about we're now in a completely different context. Linked to that ability to escalate very quickly and very violently and have choice is resilience. Sophie singled out Birmingham. I don't think there's anything wrong with Birmingham, Sophie. I think that was quite narrow-minded of you. It could have been any city in the country. But resilience is inevitably linked to your ability to deter. If you can prove you can take real violence when it's expressed against you, then actually that means that that action, that threat, is much less effective. It is a key plank of deterrence around national resilience, which is why many of the Scandinavian nations, because they have a much more proximate sense of threat, are much better at this. Frankly, more generally, Whitehall government, the public, need to be more scared, and we need to be less gentle in how we describe that threat. If there is a single percentage, I think that's too low, but if there is a single percentage probability of some level of significant disruption to our way of life, do we want to take that risk? And individually, we would not. So why would we do that as a nation? So we have got to be much more explicit about the need to be able to take hits, to be resilient as a nation, as a culture, as an industrial enterprise, as a government, as a military. But we also need to recognize that to win a war, you need to be better, more violent, more quickly than the opposition. You need more choice. The SDR recognizes in some ways in code, but it recognizes that we're not in that place.
Osby, actually, something I mentioned many years ago in a conference when people were talking about warfare in terms of a video game, because it was getting that, a bit of thinking along those lines. That we've also always got to remember, and this is a quote from Bolkonsky, Prince Bolkonsky in War and Peace: "War is the foulest thing in human history. We've got to be rid of the humbug of it." So we've got to make people understand, and this is where, Osby's point about being more violent and more vicious is absolutely right. Sophie, over to you to pick up on these points. Yeah, Sophie, you're muted at the moment.
My apologies. Yeah, and I agree with everything Osby said about the fact we were already in this sort of arms race. I also think in the UK's case, in terms of integrated air and missile defence, if we started to procure some more systems, we can discuss what. I'm not advocating for anything in particular. We're so woefully short. I don't think we're going to, start escalating in that sense in the air and missile defence area, because we've got a lot of ground to make up. I also would say, because there's been some understandable, I think, criticism of the decision to join the NATO dual capable aircraft nuclear mission from the UK's perspective, because that's considered to be contributing to or in potential, it's been suggested, contravention of the nuclear proliferation treaty. But of course, we need to be clear with the public and with those discussing this that we are not talking about procuring any weapon system ourselves or any additional weapons. That is about using existing weapons that are part of the NATO DCA mission. We're just going to be contributing aircraft as part of that. I'll pick up Chris quickly, because I've just seen Mike Harwood's question about recent dramas, and I do think I don't know if anybody's seen The House of Dynamite on the panel. I have, and I watched it with my husband, who's a bit of a space surveillance expert, and apparently it is reasonably accurate, because he's normally very annoyed at things that don't represent things properly about space, but apparently, to his expertise, it's pretty reasonable. And I thought it's not got very good reviews, but I thought it was really, really interesting. And I do agree that those kind of dramas are important. We all remember Thread. Well, no, we're three old enough to remember Threads. I'm not sure everybody on the call is, but there is something about engaging the public. And to your point, Osby, about scaring, I think this is the issue. And I think to be fair to the government that we have, last year they got so utterly criticised for being miserable about the economy, even though the economy is a bit miserable, that I think they're probably similarly now worried about scaremongering about this threat, that I think it's politically quite difficult for them to go hard on this. My view is that it probably will require some disturbances of the level of what happened in Lisbon, but other things that are those sort of what we sort of call sub-threshold attacks, but things that really, stop the NHS working for a whole day. Something like that probably is going to happen before the public realizes that we are under attack. And that's a bit of a depressing point, that I think it's going to have to be that serious before that message can be pushed home properly. But I do think that dramas and so on are useful. And I would also pick up on the Sky News, the War Game podcast, which I think tried to do that as well, if anybody's not watched it. Over to you, Chris.
Yeah, thanks very much, Sophie. And I'd just like to go down the questions. And Georgie, I think we've and tick them off as we go down, just to make sure that Ian Eden's point offensive capabilities, ultimate backstop, additional strike. I think we've done that one and spoken about the F-35. We can take that one. Unmanned early warning platforms, Jeff Wardle's question. Well, the first point is that we have said that we will pay for the radar systems as opposed to the platforms. That's already given. And I know that, certainly the last chief and no doubt the present one will say that they recognize we don't need to do studies. We've done them already. That 3 wedge tails is totally inadequate and that we will actually need the full complement. And I would be very surprised if that doesn't come out of the next phase, Phil, of the um, uh, Neville Pardon's following. Wait a minute, yeah, they're still there. Following on from the previous question, we also think about the challenge protecting industry. We've done that one. I think we can clear that one, and comms network, yeah, we've given a general reply to that one. Charles Cartwright's point, absolutely accept the importance. That must be considered part of critical national infrastructure. Everyone recognises that. Certainly, far more work needs to be done on identifying CNI and protecting it, particularly in terms of command and control, data protection, and so on. So I think we can tick that one off as well. There's an interesting one here from you and Grant on what role can big tech play in speeding things up, maybe cutting costs, especially in C4. Largely American with significant footprints. What can AI do and what it cannot? Well, I think there is an enormous amount of opportunity here. We see it already, do we not? This is one of these examples where business and commerce is actually leading the military quite significantly in terms of the exploitation of AI. And I know that there's a lot of work going on, particularly in the United States, on exploiting the advantages of AI and big tech. But Osby, would you like to make any comment on Ewan's question there?
If only to underline what you've just said, Chris. The SDR, rightly, I think, is really clear that the kind of problems we face at the macro level require vast improvements in mass, vast improvements in integration, much, much better use of available data and increasing that availability of data to make better and much quicker decisions and bringing that lot together, that sense of integration. If we don't do that, we will lose. So I think there is a role for digital tech, whether that is big tech or whether it is smaller, faster turn. I frankly don't think it matters. There are some disadvantages with big tech. Well, the real disadvantage is that they don't have to be responsible to you as a nation state. So there is something here about also bringing in concepts around digital sovereignty, not just around your data, not just around capabilities, but around access to the decisions that you make. So technology is a key, arguably in some areas, the key element of how we configure in the future against a peer opponent. We will have to be at least as good as that peer opponent in how we bring tech to bear in the business of warfighting. We should be more scared of China's approach to big tech and technology than we should be of Russia's. Frankly, Russia is, I think, becoming increasingly marginal when we talk about this type of application of technology to warfare. And when I talk about the proliferation of Chinese technology, I don't just mean missiles and drones. I mean their approach to how you harness and make better lethal use of data in your decision making and the execution of warfare. So I think it's less big tech, much more technology. I think it's non-discretionary.
Thanks very much. We've got Lily Weaver's question here for the centering of fast air in both homeland air and missile defense. That's not quite sure that we do that, but I'll get views of others as well. But we're not buying enough of them. We know that to double think, double counting. Point Lily makes. We're not going to be buying enough to use them for all of the warfighting settings. Certainly not air defense, air superiority. And then you go on to say why are we not saying a bit more about layered GBAD, ground-based air defense, particularly with the rapid value attack platforms? Well, I think what I would say as an air defender from the Cold War and beyond is the importance of the manned aircraft in the depth of air defense. And certainly, when I was thinking back to days over the North Sea, and we were operating 250, 300 miles out, the outer layer, if you like, particularly with the weapons that we had at the time, Skyflash and so on, but with Meteor and the capability of Typhoon, that outer ring, I would suggest for the time being anyway, the manned fight is very important. Now, moving on to the next generation, to what extent they will be needed, my own view is that they will still have that long-range role, and offensive counter-air, which is a point that Osby made, actually is something that perhaps we haven't focused on as much as we should as part of this whole business of maintaining air superiority. Now, I actually, on GBAD, there are moves, as I mentioned, announced in Parliament to give our ground-based air defence systems a bit of a boost. And I would be very surprised, Osby, if these don't get particular attention in the next stage of the SDR. But I'll start with Osby and then any comments from Sophie.
Um, so, Lily, you're absolutely right. There's going to be a mix of approaches, I think. I think what the SDR we would generally recognize is we don't have enough. Whatever it is, we don't have enough of it. You don't have enough of it to do what you're supposed to do, and you don't have enough to be resilient against the things that you're supposed to do, which is why we have to embrace crewed and uncrewed systems, and you have to use those systems in the context to which they're best suited. There will be a point in the future where you can trust an uncrewed system to operate without communications in the deep. In fact, you could probably do that today in some tasks, fixed targets, etc., etc. Perhaps where you've relaxed ROE, rules of engagement. But that point is probably a fair way away. So therefore, you can see the need for crewed systems operating in the deep. And when I say deep, I mean thousands of miles. In contexts where you don't know where the target is, you've got to find it. You don't know what the collateral damage implications are of that target. You perhaps don't even know what weapon system you're going to use to prosecute that target when you found it. And there is no piece of electric string back to somebody sat in a bunker. You're going to need a crewed system. I think we'll go very quickly, as far as technology and funds will allow, to a system of using our crewed system as quarterbacks. So the best way to improve air defense over the North Atlantic has got to be collaborative combat aircraft, giving Typhoon pilots 2 to 3 to 4 times as many missiles to target than that Typhoon alone can use. So that mixture of crewed and uncrewed, how much you can play autonomy into what things that would traditionally have had human in the loop, or how you get mass and effect quite quickly. The same thing applies, I think, whether you're talking ground-based air defense, layered with crewed and uncrewed airborne air defense. It's this layered and integration words that I think will be prevalent along all. So I don't think it's one or other. I think it's trying to balance with the resources available the right mix at the right time. So Lily, I think we're agreeing with you.
Yeah, definitely. And certainly I'd agree entirely with Osby, your point. Whatever we get, there will not be enough of each of the segments. But that's always been an issue in defence, not just air defence. Sophie.
Yeah, I mean, I think pretty much everything's been said that needs saying on that. I'd only add that, I mean, okay, we're talking another 5 years, 2030, but it's by sort of around 2030, NATO will have 700 F-35s. Now, they're overcommitted in many ways, but I think sometimes we need to think about it in terms of across NATO. And when you look at that numbers, that also has a deterrent effect, right? That is a lot of capability. So I think that's my slightly positive point to the negative. And I just wanted to come back, Chris, if it's okay, to Neville Parton's question, because he asked about shadow factories and is there an equivalent now? And I'm speaking to you here from Salisbury, which was the home of many Spitfire factories, shadow factories. So I know a fair bit about that history. I would say clearly we're not going to suddenly build bits of F-35 in the bus center just down the road from me, which was what we were doing then, or the bus garage, I should say. But when you look at resilience in things like weapons, building weapons, building drones, and so on and so forth, we have also industry around here that does that sort of thing, that doesn't have a sort of secondary location or necessarily a fully developed redundancy plan. And so I do see there is a parallel where we might want to build certain supporting elements to the fight, not the big aircraft, but weapons and drones and so on and so forth. And I can see how that might develop and we've seen it in Ukraine, obviously, in that way. So I just wanted to touch back on that, partly with my little historian hat on.
Yeah, thanks, Sophie. Mark Ashton, this raises the question of the importance of air-to-air refueling. I think we get that absolutely. I think what's an important part of your question, Mark, is can we get close enough, given current air defense systems, to make a difference? Well, the answers to that are stealth, electronic countermeasures, tactics, and standoff weapons. And I think at the moment, if you talk to any of the attack people, and most people have something to say about this, the modern air defense systems are becoming so very lethal. We're talking about extremely long range stealth, standoff, ECM have got to be part of the answer. And that's why, of course, the next generation of combat aircraft will have to have all of those things built in, certainly stealth being an important part of it. I'd like to think maybe tactics too, intelligence, is going to be really important. But Osby, as a man with a strike background, you've probably got a lot to say about that.
I'm not sure whether it's relevant, Chris, but I'll give it a go. The uh, Mark, your point about AER is a really good one, because this actually applies to airborne early warning as well. All three of us have talked about increasing range and why we mean the requirement for, and also we mean the reach of offensive systems. When I talk about Chinese capabilities being designed for the Pacific, a lot of that is ground and air-based air counter-air systems. And that is going to push your traditional high-value assets, AAR, airborne early warning, maritime patrol, further back. And we have to accept that that is a trend. So therefore, we're going to have to work a lot harder to protect them. And we're going to have to think much more about the range of systems that traditionally would have used AAR platforms to support. This is back to Sophie's comment around previous concepts of strategic depth and you being safe at a certain distance, frankly, will become outdated. There is also something about stealth. There's a risk that we bundle Typhoon and F-35 into the same bracket, and we should not. The Israeli Air Force have proved the quite quantum leap in capability that F-35 gives you. And we underestimate that at our peril to an extent. Sophie's point around 700 F-35s by 2030 plus in Europe is a highly lethal capability. And I have no doubt that that combat air force will be able to operate in areas of airspace that to other platforms will be denied. So, and there's something about Russia cannot match that. So Russian air defense systems will be at a disadvantage. Therefore, that emphasis on offensive counter-air, I think, will become increasingly important and will become a key role for F-35 for at least the next 15 years. Chris's point around that technology evolution, though, is absolutely right. personal opinion, F-35 will not be able to perform the same role in 2045 that it can perform in 2035 because of the progression of technology, which is why things like Generation 6 platforms, things like GCAP, will be, again, I believe I would say this, Chris has highlighted my background, will become non-discretionary in the 2040s in the same way that I would say F-35 is non-discretionary in the 2030s. So hopefully that's helpful on top of Mark's question.
I think it also brings into question any future balance that comes out of the defence review between future Typhoon purchase, the number of Typhoons that we upgrade, because of the 100 or so at the moment, only the batch 3, the 40 of the 100 are going to be upgraded to give them a full capability. Should we be investing more in Typhoon? Should we be buying more Typhoon to maintain aerospace jobs in the UK, balance that against additional F-35s? It's a very, very challenging one because if you don't have GDP, you don't have money for defence, you don't have jobs, you don't get taxes. So there's a really interesting equation to be had here. It's a political one rather than one for us. But Sophie, anything you'd like to add to Osby's comments? Okay, fine. Now there's one here from Geoffrey Wardle that actually is one that goes back quite a long way. All the way back probably to the Second World War, but certainly in my time in the Air Force, as we more and more divested jobs out into industry, we became, of course, more vulnerable to industrial action. And his question is an interesting one. Should we restrict the industrial action in times of national tension? Probably not in national tension. I would argue we're in national tension now. I mean, there's an argument that within the grey area we're already at war. I'll come back to that later. But I don't think it's one we can answer, actually, Jeff. I think it remains, as you say, a thorny question. It's really one for the politicians rather than for us. But we agree your sentiment that we clearly have a vulnerability there that we need to recognise, take account of, and decide how best to deal with it. Ian Eaton, budgets are clearly finite. No money, no money tree. We know that's for sure. And yeah, procurement action plan, etc. The expense of investing in medium and longer term architecture network system. What is the panel's view on getting the balance right? And have we? Well, yeah. I mean, this is what we're talking about actually. And so this whole webinar is really about balance of investment, isn't it? And the point I made is the importance of science rather than just having a wheeze, having a best guess. And we've got to make sure that we identify realistic scenarios, that we do the maths, and we do it properly, and that we come up with some proper decisions. And actually that might require us to take a deep swallow and perhaps put behind us some of our preconceptions of the past. As Osby was saying earlier on, he and I go back quite a long way, and perhaps I certainly tend to be more platform focused in my thinking than I should be. We need some really, and Osby certainly made this point, that we need to be thinking for more innovation, get some young minds working on this. But yeah, I mean, the bottom line is that there isn't at the moment enough evidence for this, and this applies maybe to stockpiles and replenishment as well. But certainly the scenarios, in my experience, recent experience, is that we still have got a lot of work to do to get the science right. Osby, anything from you?
A couple of points, if I may, to build on what you've just said. Ian, I think it's worth recognizing that part of the government's focus on Ukraine and supporting Ukraine is directly linked to their sense of strategic deterrence. It demonstrates well. It demonstrates NATO unity and assuming success, and therefore assuming the ability to endure later than a slowly declining Russian dictatorship. That ability to show will is a key part of deterrence, and therefore investment and continuing to support Ukraine, I see as pretty non-discretionary. If the alternative is Russia thinking NATO is weak, then that's a really bad place for us to be. part of what I think we'll see in this iteration of the Defence Investment Plan, and at least the next one, is the balance, though, that you talk about. How do you invest to make sure you are as lethal and as capable with the things you have today, as well as investing for 5 years' time, 10 years' time? Um, if there's a mindset that I think, hope will change, is we have to be ready to fight tonight, but we also have to be ready to fight and therefore deter in not many years' time. We can't afford just to assume that fixing today's problem will give us deterrence into the future. So it is a really difficult balance. But it is a balance. I think if you lent into one over than the other, then you expose a strategic vulnerability either today or tomorrow. It's why I think one of the reasons I made the comment around, yes, there's a thing about stockpiles, but there is also a thing around industrial capacity to underline your ability to sustain military operations for longer and more effectively than the opposition. Sophie, I think you'll have a comment on that as well.
I mean, I, I just want to underline your point, particularly about support to Ukraine. I think that is absolutely critical to future deterrence, particularly of Russia, particularly. It, and I think there's a dimension that that's UK specific in terms of the UK being quite important in potentially keeping the US on board on this. I'm not I'm not a fan of the term special relationship, and clearly our relationship with the US is interesting in interesting times, I think we could probably say. But whether one agrees with the methods or not, the state visit and so on, we have managed to walk that delicate tightrope and still have the ear of the administration in the US. And clearly, US continued commitment to Ukraine, I think, is also really critical and really important. So I just wanted to reiterate that. I think clearly it's been said by, I think probably already here, but it's been said. I mean, it's been said in different audiences in the last 2 weeks to me several times. Russia's you know, number one priority with NATO is to destabilize it, is to split it, is to somehow create divisions within it. So far, that's we've done okay, but I think supporting Ukraine and keeping NATO stable and together are the most important things. I know there are budgetary discussions to be had about what we spend and where, but I think there's that political angle which is absolutely critical.
I agree with Sophie, and I think absolutely vital is that the United States is seen as still being a robust member of the alliance, and there have been sort of changes in attitude from almost from 1 month to the next of the current administration, but
Just to come back on that, and I think what's also, I mean, the two things: the UK's commitment to the dual capable aircraft NATO nuclear mission is quite important in that. And but then on the US side, I think we should be uh, comforted or slightly get some confidence from the fact that despite debate to the contrary, the US did decide to replace General Cavali Saka with as Supreme Allied Commander Europe and as US UCOM with another American general, in fact, a United States Air Force general. And I think that's really, really important. If that had not happened, I'd be quite different in my view.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, certainly when I talk to friends of mine, many of whom admittedly have retired, they say, look, don't worry about any utterances. If it comes to it, we'll be shoulder to shoulder with the rest of you. And that's certainly, an informed view, which encourages me. Um, the Dan Brown's question there, uh, what can be done actually quickly to bring the population along with defence and government to at least the national mindset in a better place? I think the difficult word that you put in there is quickly. I think it's we've got a work cut out there, Dan, to do that, and it's we have not been very good. Maybe we haven't needed to, but there's another issue here, and that the UK homogeneous nation that it was in the 1930s. We've got a very diverse population with very different mindsets. We've got information coming from several sources. So, whereas you probably got it from the BBC in the 1930s and very limited radio in those days, and probably from a few, the MP appearing every now and again, there are so many diverse sources of information now, many of them contradicting each other. It is going to be very, very difficult to get our population along with defence into the right sort of mindset. But the only, well, if there's good news, is it is recognised in the Robinson Report, the importance of national resilience and the individual's resilience. But that goes through, I mean, we're not just talking about the mindset, we're talking about so many things in terms of national resilience, the fitness, the mind, the mental health, the feeling of mindfulness, the fact that we don't connected with social media or indeed artificial intelligence. All of these things undermine the sort of health of a nation. And I would say also on this, and I'll turn to Osby and Sophie, that in my view, democracy has never been more fragile than it is at the moment. It is generally under attack from several quarters. Not the extremes, but the edges of politics starting to appear, reform, and of course the new left wing party is starting to appear. You see what's happening in Italy, even in Germany, the AfD are making a lot of ground, and of course France and the turmoil that we see in France. So I think democracy is, and of course the United States. I need to say no more about that. So we do have a very different situation to the rather stable one that we had in the 1930s, and it will be a massive, massive challenge to address this. Osby and Sophie, do you want to add anything to that?
Go on, Sophie, you're the politician.
Mm. By all means, just say nothing to add.
I'll say one thing. It's not easy. It's better today than it was a couple of 3 years ago, actually. There's a better national debate. It's not a good one, but there's a better one. Um, there are about 125 people on this webinar. You will all know about 100 people. So suddenly, if we are prepared to have the right conversations with the people that we know, and if they are prepared to have the right conversations with the people that they know, then that's actually public opinion. There is something about pan political alignment on issues around national security, and there's something about the responsibility with the media to recognize when political points are being scored instead of showing pan political alignment around national security. I'm not sure we have a media landscape that is altogether as comprehensive responsible as it should be. That is something that we may wish to attack. But in the end, the diversity of channels that you talk about, Chris, means that it does come back to what the community, what those people receiving that information think, and therefore everybody's ability to think critically, I think is a key part of what we should be doing with people our age, but also particularly with our young people. Critical thinking and sifting, making their own informed decisions about what's important and what's not, seems to be at the heart of this.
I agree. Sophie?
Yeah. I mean, to that final point that you just made, we're in an era where facts, information are freely available. It is no longer potentially necessary to learn by rote various things that we used to, because we can access those really, really easily. It's we can access those, but we can also access lots of other information that isn't so accurate. So actually, the modern conundrum is teaching, as you say, the next generation and ourselves, and to be honest, my parents, how to sift through the misinformation to get to the facts that they need to use. And I mean, I go back to what I said about public opinion. I really think it's going to take a serious disruption for anybody to either get the message or then have the confidence to say, look, hey, that happened to the NHS because of a cyber attack. The next time it could be a missile attack that does something similar. We need to talk about this. That's my personal view. And just can I like take FASI privilege, because Aaron, who's one of our team, has asked 3 questions, and I just want to go to his second one, which is on automation. As automation and AI accelerate the OODA loop, how do we maintain human oversight without losing decision speed? And what happens when allies or adversaries have different thresholds for machine autonomy in IAMD operations? Because it relates to what I've just said. I think the first time that we are attacked, we lose significant numbers of people, we have some kind of major crisis, that is because somebody else was using AI and autonomy and we weren't. The public will turn around and say, why weren't we doing that? Why didn't we prepare for that? So I think opinion on that could change quite quickly. At the moment, we're being cautious, but I think potentially that could change very quickly when circumstances change.
Good. Okay. Peter Rice. Yeah. Sorry.
Osby's got his hand up.
Just to
Yeah,
come in
okay.
on that, if I may, Sophie. There is an assumption that machines make worse decisions than humans. And that may be true of other humans. I know that's not true of me. So there is something about recognizing having the right level of assurance around the decision that a machine is making is much more critical than having a human in the loop. And if that's what Aaron means by human oversight, then I think, you know, it's being comfortable with the context within which that machine is making a decision. That context will probably be driven by 2 things: the quality of that machine, its training, etc., and how scared you are. We're used to an environment, those of us when we were in the service, of weapons free and weapons tight. And if you went weapons free, it meant anything there, you shot it. And what that means is there was risk. There was going to be risk that there was something getting shot at that you shouldn't have done, but you just did. And you tended to do that when you were scared. So if a machine is going to make a decision 100 times quicker than a human and that speed doesn't matter, well, then put more human oversight in. But when it does matter, make sure the machine is trained properly, make sure you've assured it properly, and then get it on with what you're paying it for. So I do think part of where you generate an advantage is by allowing machines in the right context to use that speed. I would say our opposition will be less worried about that than we are, and therefore that's a key element of asymmetry if we over control the advantages that machine thinking gives us.
Yeah, I agree with Osby on that, and the point that was made by Sophie, and this business of being scared. I mean, during a period of transition to war, where everything is very, very sensitive, you know, and no one wants to provoke. That's where the human being is absolutely vital to oversee and be closely involved. Once you risk saturation, if you just use the human element, you've really got to look at autonomous platforms, autonomous systems. But that's a very good point. Rob, you've raised this point which I have been beating the drum about to the extent of being boring on the whole question of the B variant of the F-35 versus the A. I absolutely agree with you, but maybe my colleagues won't. I've been saying for quite a long time that you get much more range, 50% more range. You get far bigger payload in the A, and it's cheaper. And I've always argued that we should go for 48 F-35Bs for the Navy. And we'd probably be flying most of them anyway, because the Navy traditionally have problems fitting all their cockpits. We'd be responsible for the operational conversion and so on. But the rest of the fleet should be F-35As. Now, I know that brings an issue of air-to-air refueling compatibility, but we're going to have to face that with our DCA F-35. Absolutely agree. If that was your point, we should be looking at more F-35As. But Osby, do you have a different view?
In the interest of time, Rob, I think it's horses for courses. You can see points when the B will be very useful if we take a very Euro-Atlantic view of our contribution to NATO, then the role of carrier air becomes very, very important. I think what the STR highlights is focusing on one variant is probably denying yourself some real benefits, and therefore having two variants available to you with the advantages in the right time that Chris highlights has got to be sensible. Frankly, I think the two services are much more mature now about who owns what and who operates what. So I almost think at the heart of the question, it doesn't matter. It's making sure you have the right variant available to do the most important role at that time, and recognizing constraints of both. If you put the majority of your of your F-35s afloat, they are by definition less able to be used flexibly across theatres and many theatres. That's not a bad thing or a good thing, it's just a thing. So there's the flexibility of the capability rather than ownership that I think is important.
Absolutely. Sophie, I'll pick you up probably on this next one of Jeff Wardle's, which has just disappeared at the top of my page. But basically, asking the question about since we got rid of our own national capability in tactical weapons, we're told that the Trident system does have a sub-strategic capability. But the point you've made, which I absolutely agree with, Jeff, is that as far as the adversary is concerned, he sees a ballistic missile. He has no way of knowing whether that's got a tactical or a strategic nuclear warhead in it. And in terms of deterrence, we definitely need still to fill that gap of tactical weapons. To an extent, the dual capable aircraft, the F-35As that we're buying, will fill that gap. There will be, of course, dual key, a point that Sophie made earlier on. And with that limitation, your question is why not join the French Air Launch Cruise Missile Program or develop a similar capability with Germany? Is a very good one, but I'd be very surprised if actually it's addressed in this SDR. I think the best we can hope for is a firm commitment to dual capable F-35As with the dual key issue, and we know what that means. We're going to have to. The President of the United States has got to agree with the use of them, but that, for the time being, is probably the best we can hope for. I don't know whether Osby you'd agree with that.
I would, but I guess just pulling up from a deterrence perspective, introducing into the opponent's mind uncertainty is not a bad thing. So there's something about messaging and context. There will be some occasions when a bunch of systems that have a capability on that escalatory ladder, but you choose not to confirm whether you've actually deployed that capability, is a great place to be. You're introducing uncertainty. There'll be other occasions where you need absolute laser-like certainty, and therefore you need to message in that way. So I think it's an opportunity to manage rather than a clarity to be imposed.
Yeah, good point. The only danger, the obvious risk, is that if you're forced into using a tactical Trident type capability, the response could be overwhelming, particularly if we're talking about the Russia as an adversary. Sophie, anything you'd like to add to that?
No, I'm mindful we're over time, so I completely agree with Osby's points, and I think that we just concentrate on doing the very best to introduce, well, the Air Force and the MOD concentrates on introducing that F-35 DCA capability to the best of its ability in a way that doesn't distort the force any more than absolutely necessary, and plans that very carefully. And I think just concentrate on that for now, and nothing else in those terms, in terms of that tactical nuclear question. But I'm mindful we're 2 minutes over. I don't know, Chris, if you'd let me just mention from a Freeman Air and Space Institute perspective that for anybody online, note for your diary, 10th of December, we're going to be having a sort of webinar in conversation with the MAA, the Military Aviation Authority, to talk about their journey over the last couple of years. Over to you, Chris, to wrap up.
Yeah, thanks very much. And I've failed everyone to actually get to the bottom of the list which probably means that we speak for a little bit too much on the panel. But I think the question has been absolutely super. I think it's been very worthwhile. One of the things which has perhaps been mentioned is that, and it certainly was mentioned by a very eminent speaker that I heard the other day, is actually we are at war now. It is not the war of the past. It is a grey area war. We're already being attacked on many fronts. And maybe that's a message we can somehow get through to our people as part of this building a more resilient approach to the general public. Maybe also, if we don't get too much into the classified area, it's something that we could start thinking about a webinar sometime in next year, Sophie. But I think it's been very helpful, and you've certainly given us some things to ponder, including the questions we've yet to answer. I would like to thank Georgie Lucas for her backroom work. She's set this up and has been doing great work in the past. To Sophie and to Osby for being joining me as members of the panel. So thanks to you all, and let's look forward to the 10th of December, and I hope many of you will join us for that particular webinar. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much.